From 1995 through 2001, we saw what is known as the first edition or the first generation of the Essential Guides. It started out with the Essential Guide to Characters back in 1995 by Andy Mangels. Now, a lot of the things that will be noted about these are visual, so I need to show you the interior every now and then, whether we're talking about Thrawn or anybody else. Let's take Thrawn as an example here. What you'll find is the original Essential Guide to Characters had a tendency to have nice new artwork for the character, along with some vital statistics, and their background spread over a couple of pages, focusing on EU and film characters. Not a bad book, had some issues with it early on, but it's been supplanted so many times since then that it's really just more of a curiosity these days. But the series continued after the success of the Essential Guide to Characters with the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. What's most notable about the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels is, let's take the Star Home. It doesn't really matter what our example is. You have essentially blueprint type things here, or not really blueprint so much as exterior features that are pointed out, and usually what amounts to something that looks like a sketch or concept art on the page where they introduce the particular piece of technology, the vehicle or the vessel, as the case may be here. A good guide, and the artwork is something a lot of people are interested in, especially given how computerized the graphics have gotten in later Essential Guides. We then had a follow-up that seemed natural to that. If we have Vehicles and Vessels, now we have the Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology. In the case of Weapons and Technology, it looks very much the same. Say we take the light repeating blaster here. Again, you have the features from exterior 2D artwork, and then at the bottom of the page introducing it, what looks like a sketch or a concept art style sketch for that particular piece of technology, or weapon, as the case may be, hence the name. Then we had what amounts to sort of a standalone Essential Guide, as we'll see here in a moment, the Essential Guide to Planets and Moons. Interestingly, Dan Wallace, or Daniel Wallace, who put this together, had been doing a fandom project that was all about Star Wars planets, moons, and so forth, that helped to lead to eventually getting the gig to create a guide like this. So another case of someone who was a fan becoming an official Star Wars writer, though of course he's a writer in many other respects more than just Star Wars. That is his profession these days. Things like DC Comics year by year and so forth. Now, in this case what you get is not a lot of detailed views of planets, but let's take Telti for example. Usually, what you'll find is a couple of other oddball illustrations throughout the pages, but the main ones being a cutaway of the planet, common locations on the planet, and a few images of the native species, or the people who happen to have colonized that planet, whatever the case may be there. Really kind of a neat way to do it, but also somewhat of a cartoony way to do it. Not something that's going to be able to stand up to the Essential Atlas later, but this purported to be simply a guide to planets. Planet here, planet there, not something historical as the Atlas turned out to be. We then delved back into technology with the Essential Guide to Droids, kind of the one piece of technology that wasn't touched on in the other ones. And again, similar art style, though not exactly. Again, you have these exterior images with features noted, what looks like a sketch on the other side, although I will say that the sketches in this book don't look nearly as concept art-esque as the others. They seem a little more finished in their look, but still a very similar art style here throughout the Essential Guide series for the first generation. The big one of that generation, the one that really got people excited though, was the Essential Chronology. The Essential Chronology is exactly what it purports to be. It goes through and tries to tell the story of Star Wars in one Essential Guide, with a lot of new artwork divided up into sections. It was, however, black and white throughout, but it was a great book for those who are looking for a quick primer on the Star Wars Expanded Universe. The series then ended with the Essential Guide to Alien Species, which is often overlooked because it came after the chronology, and a lot of people really kind of thought of that as the capstone of the series. Here, again, different species, a different look to it here as well, kind of like a hybrid of what we saw in the new Essential Guide to Characters, or excuse me, the original Essential Guide to Characters. We have an image of the individual species and a little statistic box for each one along with their background. Again, all in black and white. In 2002, Del Rey decided to essentially reboot the Essential Guide series as they were coming up on the release of Attack of the Clones in theaters. knowing that many of these guides were approaching their 10-year mark. I mean, it had been since 1995 or so. Some of these were getting quite a bit out of date. They also wanted to reintroduce the series in color for a more immersive experience. So for the most part, they went back to their original books, like The Essential Guide to Characters, and essentially created a new version of it, a second edition, if you will, like with the Guide to the Star Wars Universe, such as, in that case, the New Essential Guide to Characters. However, in this case, they jumped between writers. They went from Andy Mangels for the original to Daniel Wallace for this one. And I must point out, because this excited the crap out of me, if you go to the author's acknowledgments on this one, you'll see where it says, let's see, Jason Fry, Christopher McElroy, Michael Potts, Nathan Butler, Chaz Libretto, and Bob Vitas for the Star Wars resources they have written. This was the first time I ever saw my name in any kind of Star Wars publication ever in print, any official Star Wars publication. I was incredibly excited to see that, and it took somebody pointing it out to me. I usually don't check out the acknowledgments. Silly me. Now, one thing to note here, again, the insides are color. The format didn't change all that much. Here's IG-88, again, a new image plus statistics next to it with the background. The format of the Essential Guide to Characters didn't change much between the first and the second versions of it. Then we had the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels originally, and now we have the new Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. This is where the art change becomes a little more specific. Take, say, the V-Wing here. Now, instead of having an exterior with features marked in just black and white, we now have, again, exterior with features marked down here. But we also have, instead of a sketch, sort of more of what looks like a computerized, I mean, it's not just, it looks like some kind of computer pulling up an image of the vehicle with some profiles down there at the bottom. A lot of folks who were into sort of the old school sketchy guidebook form of the first ones took a while to get used to this new art style for the new Essential Guides, the second editions. Here again, though, we had a change of authors. Bill Smith and Haden Blackman. That's a name we've come to know very well in recent years. We saw the same thing happen with the next Essential Guide. Bill Smith did the Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology, whereas the new Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology was done by Haden Blackman. And again, just like the interior of the other, say we have, I'm looking for a good one, Clone Trooper armor. That's a nice one. Again, exterior image with features marked here, and in this case, a more computer-generated looking image on the other side of whatever it is that is the feature in place of the sketch, but again, all in full color now. Now, in the original run of Essential Guides, the next one was the Essential Guide to Planets and Moons. There would not wind up being a new Essential Guide to Planets and Moons in that second generation. This is the one that got left out from having an updated version in the second gen. So the next one you would think, if you're going by the original publication of the first generation, would be the Essential Guide to Droids. But not yet. They skipped over droids briefly to bring us a new edition of the Essential Chronology. The Essential Chronology itself had been by Kevin J. Anderson with Dan Wallace. Then Dan Wallace, building on what he and Kevin J. Anderson had done before, presented the new Essential Chronology, updated for the most recent times as of when it was published. And again, great artwork throughout, but this time in stunning color. It's an excellent book, an excellent guide to Star Wars chronology if you're looking for something that's going to take you through it very quickly and you don't feel like listening to the Star Wars EU Primer podcast that I produce over at StarWarsFanWorks.com. At that point, they finally returned to the Essential Guide to Droids for an update and created the new Essential Guide to Droids. Both were written by Dan Wallace. And again, same type of interior change. We have a CG style image over here, or a full image over here, not a sketch, and then the features with their markings. So just like in the first series, the technology, vehicle, and droid guides all had a very similar format. It's just that the two different generations weren't similar to one another. And finally, to round out the second generation, we had the original Anne Margaret Lewis Essential Guide to Alien Species get supplanted by the new Essential Guide to Alien Species, also by Anne Margaret Lewis, but now with Helen Keier, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Keier. And in this case, we got something much cooler for the setup here, because we wind up with a full color new image of the species. It looks kind of neat artistically over here, and then the home world is given an illustration off to the side with a couple of quick statistics instead of just a little black statistic box. So it's in full color, and it just looks a lot cooler than the original, but still profiles generally of just alien species rather than specific individuals.